Welcome to Stepping Up Kosher for today. I think it's installment number 18. Where each week we try to step up our kosher a little bit by learning a little bit more of the laws of kosher. And we've been in the middle of a multi-week journey exploring the laws of milk and meat. Right? So obviously the laws of milk and meat are the most complicated, the most nuanced, the most detailed when it comes to the laws of kosher. And we already discussed how long you need to wait between milk and meat. And yes?
I have a question just on that.
Go ahead.
That applies to here.
Okay. Go for it.
So I was here for the Kiddush, right? And then I went home and I wanted to have a dairy meal.
Right.
I didn't have meat here. I had only
the other things that are associated with meat.
But they might have been cooked, some of them on.
That is a great question, and it ties directly. It's the perfect opening for today's lesson.
Oh, okay.
So just to finish, I'll repeat your question in a second for those online. So just to regroup and where we're holding, we already discussed how long you need to wait between milk and meat. We already discussed making sure that you have separate dishes and that there's a separation in terms of proximity, in terms of when you go shopping and when you put them on the counter and when you have them on the table. And are two people allowed to eat milk and meat next to each other? Is a person who is fleishig, which means he's eaten meat within the past 6 hours, is he allowed to even hang around a meal where there's dairy? We've discussed all these things already. And today, we're going to discuss an interesting topic, which is, what about, I'll give you the contemporary term for this in the Orthodox world, what about fleishig kalim or milchig kalim, which means what's if something that you're eating isn't fleishig per se, it's not meat per se. And by the way, as an example, I'm actually not going to use your example, Vicky, I'm going to use the example we have right in front of us. Here at Chabad, we only have one kitchen, and it's pretty small as it is for the amount of people that we serve. And in that kitchen, obviously, especially because there's so many different people that cook there, and often there's non-Jews that are handling the food there, we have to turn on the fire, so we have to make sure everything's kosher, but there's non-Jews involved there, so to simplify things, everything in this kitchen is meat. Right? Now, breakfast is usually a dairy meal, as we discussed for multiple reasons, especially in a kosher home where you have to wait 6 hours to eat meat. Most people are not eating meat in the morning. So every Sunday when we have a breakfast, this breakfast is prepared in meat dishes, but I would never serve anything meat or anything even close to meat related, right? But the question is, it was cooked in meat dishes. So does that now make me fleishig? Do I now need to wait any amount of time? Moving on. And to repeat Vicky's question, she was at the Kiddush here on Shabbat. Now at the Kiddush, it's not just a meal that was prepared in meat dishes. It's a meal in which I think most people that are preparing the food are going to assume that this is a meat meal. I mean, there was cholent there was schnitzel there was cold cuts there, right? This is at the Kiddush on Shabbos. Now there was also salad, but the salad was prepared in the same kitchen at the same time as all these other meat things. So does that affect it in any way? All right? Now, so this is kind of the topic we're going to discuss today. And the way it's introduced in halacha is with bread. The reason it's introduced with bread is because bread is the most common thing that will be used for both meals. And as a result, different than any other food, bread has a prohibition from a Torah perspective. And it goes like this. The chachamim, the sages, prohibited to knead or bake rolls or loaves of bread, pitas, baguettes, etc., together with meat or together with meat dishes. Which means it doesn't have to be actual meat. Good morning, Zach. Please join us. That's some breakfast. Or together with meat, dishes have some meat in it, right? So it could be like a nice onion soup that has a beef soup stock or whatever, that's like that. That's not a meat dish, but it has a little bit of meat in it, right? So you're not allowed to cook at the same time a fleishig dish and a fleishig food product together with bread at the same time into the oven. And the same thing with milk or milk products. You're not allowed to cook them at the same time in the oven. Why is this? This is because we are nervous. I think we discussed this previously in a separate class when we were talking about eating at the same table. We said a loaf of bread, because people are constantly taking pieces, and your hands can be full of meat grease and your hands can be full of milk grease. So therefore, you're not allowed to both be eating separate meals and be using the same loaf of bread in that same meal. So similarly, the same thing is what we're worried about here. If you have a loaf of bread, it was cooked inside the oven at the same time as meat, and now has the taste of meat in it. And we'll also discuss ways around that. But let's assume that you're cooking an open pot of, chicken, an open pan of chicken in the oven, at the same time as the pita is being warmed up in there. The flavor is completely transient. It's going all over, right? All the flavors that are wafting around the oven. And if you doubt me, just use your nose, right? And you'll know that. So we're worried that then you might come to take a piece of that bread together with milk, because bread is parve, right? Everybody knows bread is parve. Bread is allowed. All good. So that's why you're not allowed to do it. Okay. So when are you allowed to? What are the ways that you're allowed to? It says mutter. It is allowed to knead and bake together with meat products or milk products, as long as one of the following conditions are met. Number one, if you made a very, very small quantity, okay? So it's meant for one meal, maybe even for one person. So the example I just gave is a perfect example. The example I just gave is a perfect example. Let's say you have a pan of chicken. You're making dinner for that night. You stick in, or a pan of shawarma. Let's use a practical example, right? So you have shawarma, you're cooking it inside the oven. And obviously you want pita with your shawarma, right? So you grab 2 pitas from the freezer. You put it in, there's 2 people that are going to eat this meal. You grab 2 pitas, you stick them both inside the oven to warm up together with the shawarma. That's allowed. It's very clearly for this meal. What wouldn't be allowed is, you want to bake a batch of pita, so you're going to bake 20 pitas, and then they're going to go in the freezer, and you say, I'm going to write meat on them. No. You shouldn't do that. So again, allowance number 1 is if it's a very small quantity. Allowance number 2, if you gave them a very specific form, okay? So you can shape them into an F for Fleischig, right? No, I'm joking. But for example, if you go into a kosher bakery and they have cheese danishes, one of the things that the kosher agencies mandate of them based on this law is that the cheese danishes have to be a different shape than a regular danish, which is why if you do enough kosher bakery shopping, you walk into a bakery, usually you can tell which ones are the cheese danishes. Most often, the way that they make them do it is that there has to be some cheese oozing out. In other words, maybe sometimes it's a good delicacy to have it completely wrapped in and it's like a surprise, right? Maybe like a croissant or something, right? But when they have it with cheese, usually the cheese is kind of coming out on the 2 sides. They make it kind of as an open, almost like a calzone. Has anybody ever seen this, like a cheese danish like that? And the cheese is coming out on both sides in order that you should be able to clearly tell that it is a cheese danish. Allowance number 1 was if it's a small quantity that's clearly just for this meal. Allowance number 2 is if it's a specific form that's very clear that this is meat or this is milk. And number 3, okay, I already mixed the 2 together. But number 3 is if there's cheese or meat visible on the outside of the pastry. So number 2 was if it's a specific form. Number 3 is, so sometimes what they'll do is if they do want to make a closed cheese danish, they'll take a little bit of cheese and sprinkle it on top as kind of a topping, and then that kind of makes it into one, into a clear simon, You're excited to come out? You want to see everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, say good morning to everybody.
Good morning. Look how beautiful she's smiling.
Okay. All right. But if you made an amount of bread that's more than 1 day's worth, plus you didn't make it a specific shape, it's just the shape of a regular loaf of bread, plus it doesn't have any of the product that's inside it on the outside of it, so then you're actually not allowed to do that according to Jewish law. Okay? All right. Any questions?
So I can make a bread it's shaped like any other bread, like a pita,
Right?
and I can make that milk or meat if I have it sprinkled on the outside.
Yes, if you put milk or meat on the outside for that specific reason, because we don't want you going and using it later for something. Okay.
The theory is you don't have to worry about whether it's milk or meat later because you cooked it together for that meal that time.
That's
So you
why
know
the small
exactly
quantity
that's why
allowance.
it's
Yes,
allowed.
that's why there's an allowance for a small quantity, because we're not worried that you're going to take that bread and use it for later. But if you're making a large batch, then
Right.
we are worried about it. Okay. What about if there's no milk or meat in the oven now? But it is a fleischig or a milchig oven. It is my oven that is designated for milk or meat products, right? So he says, an oven in which you usually heat up either meat or milk. And usually the milk or meat is open, which means it's not an oven in which you this is only a kosher concept. I don't think there is such a concept I was going to say a microwave, but even a microwave, people do things open all the time. Yeah. So if it's an oven that you always only put things in covered, then that's a different story. But we're assuming that it's an oven in which you cook things that are uncovered all the time. And therefore, there can be drippings that go down to the bottom of the oven. Not that I've ever done that before and turned on the smoke alarm. Never happened, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it could happen. And there are fumes that go all around the oven, etc., right? Excuse me. And those fumes or those drippings can now drip onto the bread. So he says in such a situation, when you have open meat or open milk products inside the oven, so then you are not allowed to bake bread in there, again, unless you have the previous allowances that we said. Even if you're not warming it up for now, I'm sorry, even if you're not currently warming up meat or milk, rather, there's just a little bit of leftover, maybe some drippings on the bottom from that are fleshigs or milchigs, and you can be worried that maybe those drippings will go onto the bread, so you're not allowed to bake in there. You're not allowed to bake bread in there. Okay, hold on. All right, I'm just looking. Some of these things I said already as we were going through it, and he's just getting to it now. All right, another way that you would be allowed to do this, I think it's fairly obvious, but I haven't mentioned it yet, so just in case, if the bread is covered. If you're going to be warming up bread and the bread is covered, right, completely sealed, let's say in a piece of foil or whatever it is, and it doesn't be sealed like that, there's no air that goes in or out. Thank you, Anna. Of course, yes. So then you are good to go, and we say that the meat, we're not worried about the meat or milk taste or fumes or drippings transferred to the bread because the bread itself is covered. Okay, I guess that's another allowance. Next, a lot of these things we covered already as we were going through them. Okay, but he's just getting to them now. Pastries such as burekas or cookies or cakes that you want to bake together with milk or cheese inside, for example, you should be careful to bake them in a very specific shape in order that people shouldn't make a mistake and eat them together with meat. For example, you can make the milchig burekas into braided or half circles. He's giving you practical examples, or triangles, exactly. Different shapes than the other burekas that you make. By the way, another thing that people often do is they will sprinkle a different topping on top. So, for example, they'll make potato burekas and meat and cheese burekas or meat burekas, and on one they'll put sesame seeds, on the other one they won't. Things like that. All the same point that it's a different shape. It's very clear, or a different look, so that it's very clear that it's different. Okay. If you want to bake bread and eat it together with milk, and you want to bake it, and you want to bake it in an oven that now has nothing in it. There's no drippings. There's no meat. There's nothing in there. But it has been used in the past for meat. Even if you haven't used it in the past 24 hours, there are those that say that you shouldn't. However, there are those that are lenient and say that you can do that as long as you turn on the oven on its maximum heat for half an hour. Then they say, okay, you can bake bread in there and it's considered part of it and you can eat it together with a milk dish. Yes? What's the question?
I'm relieved.
What? You're relieved? Oh, okay. Good. Bread or any other pastry which was baked in a meat dish, which was clean from any drippings or any other pieces of food that might have been there, and you haven't used it in 24 hours. So he says it's a good idea not to eat it together with milk, but technically you're allowed to. I want to talk about this practically, what this looks like practically. So if you just come to somebody's house, right, and they give you some bread, and you say to them, I was planning to eat dairy later. I just wanted to confirm, where was this bread baked? And they tell you it was baked in a fleshig oven. Right? So I know we went back and forth, we had ups and downs. You can be more stringent, you can be more lenient, etc. Practically speaking, this is, what?
You said fleshig.
A fleshig oven, yeah. So an oven that usually they use to warm up their chicken, warm up their meat. And you look at them and you say, whoa, it wasn't baked together with meat. No, not together with meat. The oven was clean. It had just been cleaned by my housekeeper just half an hour before that. Right? The thing is, but that's my meat oven, and that's where I bake the bread. You can feel free to eat that bread on its own, or just as part of, and then an hour later, or even 5 minutes later, just rinse out your mouth. I'm not even sure you need to rinse out your mouth. You can eat a milk dish. The only thing that was prohibited, that we're saying you should be stringent not to do, is to eat it together with milk. So, for example, let's say it's cookies. You cannot take those cookies and dunk them in milk, right? So this is why, for example, in my house, especially because we have little children in the house, right? I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, etc. So in my house, I try to the cake that's going to be designated for Shabbos morning, which I often bake a cake for Shabbos morning to have together with coffee, right? So that the kids are going to be having cereal and milk, and they have all sorts of other things happening. I don't know what's going to happen with my 7-year-old, with my this one or that one, right? So what I do is I bake those cakes in a milk oven just in case. But that's only because I'm worried about that, right? And it's only because I want to have it together with my coffee. But if I couldn't do that, what do you find here? But if I couldn't do that, if I could only bake it, for example, in a meat oven, I would go ahead, bake a cake, have it Shabbos morning. Just your coffee has to be had separate. You cannot have the two of them together, which I know for some people is a deal breaker. It's part of your coffee experience. They call them coffee cakes, right, for a reason. The first time somebody told me they have a coffee cake for me, I thought it was a coffee flavored cake. But really, it was a cake to eat together with coffee. That's what they call them now. So that's like one of those examples we have to be worried about. But it doesn't mean it makes you inflation. By eating that doesn't mean it makes you inflation. So let's get back to Vicky's question. Right? So Vicky's question was. Actually, let's not get back. Let's not get back to it yet. I'm going to use that as the ending of the class today. Okay? Let's keep going through the book. Yeah. Let's keep you in suspense. Let's keep going. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Anna, for breakfast this morning. So let's keep going through the class, and at the end we'll get back to that specific topic. If you have bread that touched meat or milk, what about that? So we pardon the pun, but we touched on this earlier in this series, but let's just review it because we're talking about this topic. If you have bread that touched meat, so then you're not allowed to eat it with milk or with cheese. And the same thing, the opposite. Even if both of them are completely dry, you should be stringent not to eat it with the other category. More than this, if the bread touched the meat, you shouldn't even leave that bread. You shouldn't even leave leftover of that bread to be eaten in another meat meal. The same thing, the opposite. If you have milk that touched, if you have a bread that touched a milk product, let's say it was dunked in milk, and now it's completely dry. You cut up that piece, right? You shouldn't even leave that over to be eaten with another milk meal later. Why? Because maybe you'll forget and you'll eat it with the other category. It doesn't make a difference. Hold on, we're getting there. It doesn't even make a difference, even if you cut off the piece, the side of it that touched the milk or the meat product, because we don't know how far the grease went in and the taste went in, etc. Still, you shouldn't do so. Yeah. Can you put a sticker on it? I would say you can. I don't know if you can put a sticker if you actually if it literally touched. I think that's a little different.
Wrap it in tinfoil
and put a label on it. This is fleshing.
Yeah, fleshing, and then only eat it for fleshing. I don't know.
Or only with meat, right? If it's
right, yeah. That's what she's saying. Slap a label on there that says fleshing or meat, and use that in the future. I think it's discouraged. I think it's discouraged. According to the law, you're allowed to, but it's discouraged because you might forget at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't have any kids who can't read, so.
Right. I'm trying to think. In my house, we do that, not for bread. We do it for vegetable, sometimes we have sauteed vegetables. But it's not that it was done together with cheese or together with milk. It was done in a milk pan. So let's say I'll saute. We're making quesadillas, for example, right? So you saute a whole bunch of little vegetables, onions, peppers, and mushrooms, and whatever, right? And then you make the quesadillas, and you have half a bowl left, and you're like, oh, perfect. This will be for another day, right? So we freeze them in little deli containers. And we write on the milk, but it's not even really, there's no milk touched it. It was just a milk pan. No. So we do that for when it was cooked in milk or meat dishes, but we don't do that for bread, for something that actually touched milk and meat. I think that's different. No, you shouldn't leave it over. It can be very, very confusing.
So I thought you were not supposed to throw out bread though either.
Yes, so you can do whatever you do with bread. That you're not give it to the ducks, give it to the birds, bring it, offer it to your neighbor, whatever it is. But you shouldn't leave it over. It seems like, at least it's discouraged. Okay. Last one. What about bread that was cut with a knife, that was milk or meat? Now we've discussed in the past a concept called durka de sakina. Durka de sakina means the pressure of cutting with a knife, which means that because a knife, when you cut something, the food is not just touching it. The food is very tight on it, right? When you cut through, I don't know, think of like a tomato, right? You can't compare cutting a tomato to just a tomato, I don't know, sitting on a plate, right? Here, it's being pressured against each other as you slice through it, right? So because of this thing, he says you're not allowed to cut bread with a knife that is meat, which you're going to use. By meat we mean fleshig. It's totally clean, but it's a meat knife, and you want to use it to cut bread that you're now going to put butter on. You can't do that. And the same thing, the opposite. And if you did cut it, if the knife was, so he says this is called b'diavad. If it's already after the fact, you already cut them. You didn't realize you took a knife, you cut the bread, and you're about to put butter on it. So he says, hey, you just used the meat knife to cut it. You're like, oh, but it was totally clean, you know? So once it's done already, it's fine. because it's not really that big of an issue. We're not really worried. It's just a precautionary measure, and therefore you can use it with the other category. Let's say it's milk. But if the knife wasn't clean, let's say it had grease on it from meat or something, whatever, then obviously big no. Yeah, then
Rabbi, I
then
don't
we're worried
know
about
why you're doing that.
what?
Put keys in her mouth.
Fine.
Kind of different.
All right. Everybody's nervous about it. We'll do this. All right. And then she wants the keys now, see? Yeah. All right. Okay, so let's get back to Vicky's question. Because Vicky's question applies to a lot more than perhaps she realizes. So let's start with her actual question. So Vicky's question was, I was sitting here at the Kiddush. There were a lot of products on the table. Some of them were meat, and very clearly they had chicken, they had meat in the cholent, etc. I avoided those, and some of them were other things such as salad, etc. Okay, so I would say that in a situation where you're in shul, you should consider yourself fleishik, and you shouldn't eat milk for another 6 hours afterwards. Why do I say that? I say that because you're in a very, very uncontrolled environment. I don't know if you've ever seen the buffet at the buffet line at a kiddush in a shul. People are using spoons from one for the other one. Look, technically, if the salad was prepared in the kitchen and nothing even close to anything meat touched it, and no knives were used that were just used for cold cuts, were used to cut the vegetables in the salad, and it came out, and you saw this, and it came out, and it sat on the buffet, and nobody moved from one to the other at the buffet. Right, and nobody was holding their plates with their cholent, and maybe a tiny drop chopped it. None of that happened. Then technically you'd be in the clear, and eating the salad would be totally fine. But because it's a very join us, have some breakfast and that. Because it's an environment in which a lot of cross contamination in a very uncontrolled and unobserved environment is happening. So that's why we say it's discouraged, and you should probably consider yourself meat. What is another example of this? Another example of this is restaurants. You have to be very, very careful. This happens all the time. It's a Saturday night. Right, you're going out with your friends, and you're going out to. It was voted that we're going to go out to a milk restaurant, to a milchig restaurant, right? Okay, no problem. Let's go. You don't want to be the one to vote it out, so you've had a nice cholent at 4:00 in the afternoon, and you're not going to be dairy until or dairy meat free until 10:00 at night. Yeah. But it's 8:00, and they want to go out. You're like, all right, let's go to a milk restaurant. I won't eat anything. Then you come to the milk restaurant, now you're hungry, right? Now everybody's food is sitting there. And we discussed that you're allowed to do that. You're technically allowed to do that. You're allowed to be there. You just have to be careful, right? Sometimes you can put something on the table to remind yourself. Okay, beautiful. Now you start thinking to yourself, I'll just have some French fries. What's the big deal? The French fries are right. You have to be very, very careful. The French fries are coming out of a kitchen in which, for example, the French fries are usually being deep fried in a deep fryer that will have mozzarella balls being deep fried in there. And that makes them 100% milchig. Right, because the taste is going from one to the other. But let's say he says, okay, I'm just gonna have a salad. You don't know which knife was used. Did they 100% make sure that knife was clean, etc. So usually best practice is to consider it 100% dairy. The one allowance I would give you is to ask the restaurant. You can ask the restaurant. And sometimes they'll tell you. You ask them, you say, what can I be... And often you can ask for the mashgiach, which is the one, right? Meaning sometimes there's non-Jewish workers in the restaurant. I don't advise asking them, right? But you can ask either a Jewish, if it's a small place, you ask the Jewish. You can say, what can I be... I'm fleishik. I want to be safe. What can I rely upon that's 100% power of? This was a case that I had recently. That's why I'm bringing it up. I went out a couple of Saturday nights ago. Went out with my brother and my sister and my wife. We all went out together. We went to a milk place. I was the only one who had eaten meat later on in the day. So I said, no problem. Let's go. I don't want to be difficult. I'm not going to say, let's find somewhere else. We went out. I got there and I was planning to eat. And I basically just asked them behind the counter. I said, what can I be safe with? And the one thing they told me that I can be safe with was a salmon salad. Why? Salmon salad. Why? Because they said we keep the fish separate from the cheese and milk for other reasons. Because there are those that are careful not to have, it's a topic for another time, but not to have cheese and milk together with.
Like you do here, you don't have the dairy with.
Yeah, but here that's what everything.
The fish, right?
Yeah, but that's also because here everything is cooked in fleishik.
Right.
Right.
This
pan here is a meat. No. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Yeah. And basically they said we keep the salmon salad anyways, and the salad is just whatever. So you have a salmon salad, no problem. Now I'm not saying that goes for every restaurant. You have to ask the restaurant to see. They knew that. I guess they've been asked this question before, so they said that you can be safe as parov. So I had my parov dish, and that's it. An hour later, we were still sitting in the restaurant, and I was already dairy. So I had some nice truffle cheese fries with the parmesan or whatever, and I was good to go. But that is the. Well, you find this funny? But that was a story that's another practical example of what Vicky is saying. Now, where this does not apply is in the house. If you were to come to my house and you tell me that you're meat, and I tell you, have this, no problem, the house is a very controlled environment. I'm the one who made all the food. I'm sitting here at the table with you. You know exactly what's going on. So it's a very different story. And for sure, your own house, right? I'm not telling you that salad makes you fleishik. What I'm telling you is that as a religious Jew, we want to make sure that we're reasonably avoiding fleishik. And when you have a very cross-contaminated situation where all the food is touching each other in the buffets and people using the same spoons, etc., you want to be very, very careful about that. And basically, I would say best practice is to consider yourself meat, even if you only ate salad at the Kiddush. Now, there's another option at the Kiddush Chabad, which is you can ask Mrs. Anoka. Is it 100% foolproof? No. And can she tell you? I don't think so. I don't think she can rely on the
salad or a
salad
or whatever.
No problem.
As long as I don't put any dressing or
exactly.
anything on
That's
it.
dairy dressing. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. All right. And with this, we will conclude bread that was baked in a meat or a milk oven, which is the topic that we're discussing today, and other foods that were baked together with milk or meat. And that is our next installment of Milk and Meat. Please join us next week for Stepping Up Kosher, installment number 19. Looking forward to seeing you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
You got it.